So today we're going to take a look at our next text, which is called Significant Cigarettes. This is based on an extract from the novel, which is called The Road Home. And today we're going to explore a little bit about um, the context behind it, as well as the various usage of language and techniques and so forth that the writer utilizes. So one of the things let's start with here first is the author. The author's name is her name is called Rose Tremaine. She's an English novelist, and she's quite renowned for writing about sort of uncommon subjects. What type of uncommon subjects? Well, that's something we'll talk about in a little bit. Now, for the extract, it takes place primarily in Eastern Europe. Now, if you take a closer look at the map, right, in Eastern Europe, you'll see that Eastern Europe, in comparison to sort of Western Europe, right, Western European countries like, say, the UK, Germany, and France, right, Eastern Europeans tended to have much lower GDP, so their economies tend to be a lot poorer. Okay, from many of these countries. So the fact that this writer, the extract takes place in Eastern Europe, right, is a very important part because we'll see that some of the problems that the characters face is related to this issue here. Okay. Now, also something to take note here is a little bit about the title, right? So why is it the text called Significant Cigarettes? Well, in this case here, first we're going to take a look at the cigarettes, right? So what's the influence of cigarettes? Well, the thing is, cigarettes, as you can kind of see here, cigarettes is a very popular activity, especially among Eastern Europeans, right? It's got a very sort of wide popularity in this region, in addition to alcohol. Okay, so for many of Eastern Europeans, right, the act of smoking and drinking alcohol is part of their daily lives. So for our character, our Lev, our main character Lev, cigarettes has sort of become a symbol of his sort of home. It's a reminder of home for him. Okay, and it creates this strong feeling of nostalgia. Now, going back, previously I mentioned here, the writer likes to write about uncommon topics. Now, for this extract in particular, it's a little bit of an unusual topic in the sense that this extract is about economic migrants. Now, economic migrants has become quite a popular topic nowadays, right? We see it all throughout the news. Um, no matter which country you're from, it's very much part of the fabric of most of our daily lives, right? There's this sort of issue about migrants now, or migrants and also illegal immigrants as well. But the thing is, right? First off, what are economic migrants? Well, simply put, they're people who kind of travel, long distances to other countries to make a living, right, to earn some money. But the thing is, what is the world's general attitude towards, economic migrants? Well, suffice to say, right, in a single word, a lot of the world is quite xenophobic. There's a very strong sense of xenophobia, which is kind of this fear of these, other people, right? People from other countries and other ethnicities and places, what have you. There's a very strong sense of xenophobia, especially nowadays, and we see it, right, kind of come to fruition, right? No matter it's the President Donald Trump and his sort of very kind of xenophobic attitude towards immigrants, as well as even in Brexit, right? In the UK itself, right? The UK voted for breakfast. They voted for Brexit, and a large part of it, I won't say the whole thing, but a large part of it was due to sort of the fear, right, of losing control, right? Losing control of the country, and this fear of all these migrants from other countries coming in and sort of taking their resources. So for much of the world, right, there's a very strong prejudice or dislike of people from of these economic migrants, or even just migrants, or legal or illegal. Okay. Now, for our text, right, for our text in particular, we're going to kind of see a little bit unusual in the sense that we're going to see a very transient glimpse, a transient moment of the lives of two particular migrants as they journey to their new country. And so in this text in particular, we're going to see a little bit from the perspective of economic migrants. Usually for us, right, we think of the issues as a local, right? We see people coming in from our country, but in this text here, we're going to take a look at the perspective of the economic migrants themselves. How does it look like from the outside looking in? Now, the key characters in this extract there's three. First one, the most important one, is probably Lev. Lev is our main character, and he's a devoted husband and also, unfortunately, a widow. So his wife passes away. He's 42 years old, so he's middle aged. He's got no notable skill sets, right? So he's not really technically proficient or really particularly well educated. But in this case here, he's going abroad not because he wants to, but because he has to, right? He needs to earn money to support his family. Now, Marina is the deceased wife of Lev, and so she's passed due to an unknown illness, and she is a very frequent source of Lev's flashbacks. So he constantly thinks back about her, and we see this come up throughout the text. And we see from also the flashbacks that he too was quite close to her husband, so he's established quite a good relationship, a very close relationship, loving relationship with his wife. And it's unfortunate she passed away. Now, the last character we'll take a look at here her name is Lydia, and she is a passenger who happens to sit next to Lev. And in our extract, we're going to explore a lot about this transient moment where Lev and Lydia, they sit next to each other both on their journeys to this new country, and we sort of explore through this very brief moment, right, their sort of relationship in this very with each other. Now, quick things about Lydia is that she's educated. So she's a little bit different from Lev. She's more educated. She works as an English teacher at her homeland, in her previous country, and she's interviews for a translator position. So she's a little bit more educated, a little bit more technically trained. She's got some more specialized skills, right? And so she's got better job prospects. Now, one big difference, however, between the two characters is that whereas Lev doesn't want to leave, but he's only leaving because he has to, right? He has to find money to support his family. Lydia, on the other hand, her job gives her enough pay, actually. She earns enough money to make a living, but she chooses to leave under her own volition, right? She chooses to leave. Why? Because she wants to escape this very boring, monotonous life. And she's choosing to leave because she's tired of doing the same job and looking at the same window. She wants for something new. All right, so that kind of wraps up the characters. And now next we're going to take a look at is the actual text itself. Now, as we go along here, I'm going to occasionally flip back to the PowerPoint and to kind of highlight a little bit about the vocabulary and things like that. All right, so let's begin. So we've already talked a little bit about the title and the significance, i.e. the symbolism, right, of cigarettes, so won't go back there. Other than that, just moving on. So the text begins here by saying, on the coach, right, so to take the bus, Lev chose a seat near the back, and he sat huddled against the window, staring out the land he was leaving, at the fields of sunflowers scorched by the dry wind, at the pig farms, at the quarries and rivers, and the garlic growing green at the edge of the road. Now, a couple things I want to point out here first. A, here is the alliteration, right? Garlic growing green. And also B, I also want to point out here is this sort of list, right? Or this sort of imagery that the writer starts this or introduces our text with, right? And you'll notice that in this case here, the imagery of the landscape, right? The diction of the language that the writer chooses to describe the land that Lev was leaving, i.e. his homeland, right, is quite beautiful. Okay, so he talks about here. There's quarries, there's rivers, right? There's garlic that's going green. There's sunflowers and pig farms. So the writer creates this sort of beautiful imagery of the landscape, right? And it's important because it kind of shows you that Lev really, appreciates and loves this land, his homeland, right? That he lives in, but at the same time, he's leaving it. Okay, he doesn't want to leave this, this beautiful land. Lev wore a leather jacket and jeans, a leather cap pulled over low over his eyes, and a handsome face was gray-toned from smoking, and in his hands he clutched an old red cotton handkerchief and a dented pack of Russian cigarettes. This line here tells us that Lev doesn't really carry many things with him. Rather, he's quite he doesn't carry very much with him. He's not a lot of belongings. It's not like he's taking a suitcase, right? But also this line here, which is he would soon be 43. So this line tells us he's this sort of middle-aged man. This is important. Why? Because whereas for there's often this sort of kind of stereotype that perhaps some people the young kind of leave the country to chase their dreams, right? Unfortunately, Lev isn't this case. He's not this 18, 20-year-old going to a new country to make it rich or what have you, but rather he's just sort of this middle-aged man, right? Who's a father, right? Who's leaving behind his homeland, and he's not got a lot of things with him, right? And he's got to go to this new country to start a new life. And so, if you can imagine, right, being 43 is a typical age where a lot of people sort of kind of established a family and a job. But here he is, Lev has to go to a new country to start anew, and that's quite tough. Okay, and as a reader, we feel a little bit sympathetic because it's not an easy task for him to do, right? After some miles, the sun came up. Lev took out a cigarette and stuck it between his lips. The woman sitting next to him, a plump, contained person with moles like splashes of mud on her face. So here we're introduced to our next character. Her name is Lydia, but though we don't know it yet. One thing I do want to point out here is the simile here, like splashes of mud on her face, right? So he talks about here, he knows that she's got moles, like splashes of mud on her face. So the simile here kind of is quite a little bit negative. So it kind of gives us this idea that perhaps this initial interaction or this initial impression between Lev and Lydia is a little bit more negative, right? So he doesn't view her as some, very pretty person. Rather, it's kind of the opposite, right? He views her as kind of a little bit ugly. She's got mud splashed all over her face. And she says here, I'm sorry, but there's no smoking allowed on this bus. So she tells him this line. She's quite firm, but she's also polite and says there's no smoking. Lev knew this, had known it in advance, had tried to prepare himself mentally for the long agony of it. Now here the writer introduces the usage of emotive language, right? The long agony. So here the writer admits that Lev knew he couldn't smoke, right? And he tried, he tried to prepare, to himself to mentally prepare at least, to not smoke during this journey. But of course, this process is very, very difficult, right? And that's expressed through this emotive language, right? It's not just difficult; it's agonizing, right? It's almost painful, right, to not smoke. And the thing is, the smoking isn't. It's not just that he's craving smoking because he's addicted to nicotine. But the thing is, if you look carefully at the next line, even an unlit cigarette was a companion. So you'll notice here that the writer uses personification here, right? And he's personifying the cigarette as not just something that gives him nicotine, that solves his nicotine addiction, but rather it was a companion, a friend. So here the cigarette carries a meaning greater than what it physically is. It's something to hold on to, something that had promise in it. Right? So it's personified. Right? So he continues this personification as if it's a person, right? It's an idea, it's a belief, right? And all he could do by the now was to nod. Now, why is this personification of the cigarette? Well, do remember, right? We talked a little bit about, for many of these Eastern Europeans, right, cigarettes is a reminder of home. So for him, right, for this, for someone who's traveling alone to a new country, right, who's leaving behind his family and friends and what have you, right, his only sort of reminder of home now is this one cigarette, right? So the cigarette carries a very important significance and meaning to our character. And all he could do was nod, right, to show you understood, reassure that he wasn't going to cause trouble, because there they would have to sit 50 hours or more side by side with their separate aches and dreams, like a married couple. So here we have another example of simile, right? Like a married couple. But this time, this simile isn't necessarily to show or to illustrate how close of a relationship Lev and Lydia has. Rather, it's to show the sort of the opposite, right? So in this case here, this simile really illustrates the sort of the awkwardness, the strangeness, right? The weirdness, where two strangers have to sit together for a long, long period of time, 50 hours or more, right? Like a married couple. But the thing is, this simile isn't necessarily showing the closeness, rather it's showing sort of the awkwardness, right? Because it's highlighting how they had to sit together so closely, just like a married couple, when in fact they are complete strangers to each other. They would hear each other's snores and sighs, smell the food and drink they had brought, note the degree which was fearful and unafraid, make short queries in conversation. So here the writer gives us a very simple listing, right, of the various sort of mundane or boring activities that they had to do with each other. And note that this list of activities, all of it's very simplistic and dull. So it kind of illustrates here that the journey that they shared together is one that's quite uneventful and boring. And then later, when they finally arrived in London, they would probably separate with barely a word or a look, walk out into the rainy morning, each alone, beginning a new life. So here, the writer kind of builds onto that sort of transience of life that we seems to be a theme in this text, right? Here, that after sharing those 50 hours together, right, after talking, knowing, get to know each other, once they arrive, they'll look away, they'll go on their own lives and never see each other ever again. So it talks a little bit about, it kind of shows a little bit about how transient life can be and how, it's just a brief moment that these two are together. And Love thought how all of this was odd but necessary and already told him things about the world he was traveling to. A world in which he would break his back working, if only that work could be found. Now, and Lev is quite self-conscious of this, right? He understands that going to this new country, right? He's not going to, make a lot of new friends, and create this, a new life for himself. Rather, it's going to be a lot like this experience with Lydia, right? He's going there in a new country. He's going to make money. He's going to do work. He's going to go to work, go home, right? But it's just a brief stop. Okay, it's not him creating a new life for himself. Rather, it's just for him to make ends meet, so he can get enough money to send back and take care of his daughter and mother at home. So it creates a little bit of this sympathy feeling for us, right? We feel a little sympathetic for Lev here because we understand that the journey and the path ahead of him is not easy. Okay. And then he goes on and kind of elaborates this further and says that, he would, a world in which he would break his back working. So here the writer kind of hyperbolizes it, uses hyperbole, and it tells us that he's willing to put in all the hard work, right? He's willing to struggle, to suffer the hard work, right, to provide for his family. And not only that, though, he says that here, he also doesn't mind demonstrating he doesn't need to belong. His heart remained in his own country. So the writer here utilizes, again, another example of hyperbole, right? That basically tells us that, though his physical body is in the country, right, his heart, all the people he cares about, all the things he cares about is still back in his home, right? His heart is still thinking and with his 5-year-old daughter and his mother and his deceased wife. Okay, so all of this creates a very powerful feeling of sympathy for our character. And then the writer goes on. There were 2 coach drivers, so 2 drivers. The men would take turn to drive and sleep. There's onboard lavatory, bathroom. So the only stops the bus would make would be for gas. At gas stations, the passengers would clamber off, so they climb off, walk a few paces, see wildflowers, flowers on the verge, soiled paper mound bushes, rain around. So the writer continues this kind of more listing here, and sort of listing again kind of illustrates that once they get off the bus, it's not like these people aren't in some beautiful scenic journey, right? They're not looking out and seeing the Eiffel Tower or anything like that. Rather, when they make a stop, all they see are just everyday gas stations, right? Walk a little bit, they see a little bit of wildflowers, they see some trash, right? Some dirty paper among the bushes, right? Some sun on the road. So the description here really reflects that the journey that these people are on, again, it is not some beautiful journey. Rather, it's kind of dull, right? It's a long and boring and arduous journey that these men are on. They might stretch their arms, right? Look for clover leaves, smoke, and stare at the conjuring glass. Again, it's all these actions that they do are fairly dull, very boring. Right? It's a long, boring journey. Then they would be herded back. The word herded reminds me at least a little bit of kind of the animal addiction you would associate with kind of taking care of animals, right? So, and it kind of shows here that these people aren't, again, not treated like business class passengers or first class passengers. Rather, they're just, just people or things, right? That these people are transporting. So they're not treated to some luxurious journey or anything, right? And they would go back onto the bus and keep their old attitudes and prepare themselves for the next 100 miles for the stink of another industrial zone, right? Sorry, I forgot to show you some of these pictures. Um, the stink of another industrial zone. So here, as you can kind of see in this picture, right? Again, this journey that they're on, right? They're not passing beautiful scenery, rather they're passing these areas where there's a lot of industrial plants that emits a lot of this disgusting smell, right? Stink, right? So again, the journey they're on is not very beautiful. Or the sudden gleam of a lake for rain or sunset and the approach of silent darkness. Or notice here the word sudden gleam of a lake, right? So, or just a very brief moment where they can see a lake and then it disappears. So again, the journey itself is not not a lot of beautiful scenery. There would be times when the journey would seem to have no end, right? So this line here tells us that this journey it feels like it's going on forever. So it creates this feeling of boredom, right? And that we kind of sympathize with our characters that they're engaged in such a long, boring, and dull trip. And then the writer introduces us our first of a few different flashbacks. Okay, the writer makes a few flashbacks, and this is one of them. Okay, but let's take a look at this first one first. Sleeping upright was not something Lev was practicing. So again, sleeping upright is a position that's not very comfortable. If you've ever practiced sitting straight up, not a comfortable position. The old seemed to be able to do it, but 42 was not yet old. Lev's father, Stefan, sometimes used to sleep upright in summer on hard wooden chair in his lunch break at the Barren sawmill. So here the writer makes a flashback and talks about a memory of his father and how he used to sit sleeping straight up on a hard wooden chair. Okay. And so this is, and you can kind of see from this picture, right? If you imagine sitting straight up from this hard chair, right, it's not a comfortable feeling. So we can kind of, based on this description, kind of surmise that these people, they don't really have a very comfortable life, even back home. Okay, that they lived a kind of a tough life, right? They're sleeping in hard wooden chairs. Okay. Both Stefan and Lev could sleep lying down on a mound of hay or on the mossy carpet of a fortress, right? So, fortress of the forest. Right, so they're sleeping on some hay. They're sleeping on the mossy carpet. So it's not like they're sleeping in beds, right? So the life they lived back home was pretty tough. Okay, and we can kind of infer it based on these couple lines. And when his wife Marina was dying, so here we're introduced to our next character, which is his wife, right? We see another side of Lev, and this side of Lev, he tells us here that he laid for five. Oh, sorry. Let me go take one step back. When Lev had slept on a rag rug beside his daughter's bed, a rag rug is this sort of material. So as you can kind of imagine, it's not a very soft or comfortable material, but he's used to sort of this harsh, difficult life, right? He's not afraid of sleeping in hard surfaces. But notice here, it talks about here, he sleeps on a rag rug beside his daughter's bed when she was either sick or afraid. So we see that Lev is a very caring and considerate father, right? He doesn't mind sleeping on the floor just to be beside his daughter who's afraid of the dark, perhaps. And then we see that caring continue, right? Because here, in the next line here, it talks about here, when his wife was dying, he used to sleep on the linoleum floor, okay, between the beds. So here Lev didn't mind sleeping on the hospital floor to be with his wife as she's dying on his hospital bed. And this is sort of very commendable, right? It's something that, as a reader, we feel, again, very sympathetic because we see that Lev cares a very great deal about his family, right? And he's willing to sleep on the floors to comfort his scared child, or he's willing to sleep on the floor of the hospital to be with his dying wife, right? These are all very commendable actions, and we feel very sympathetic, right, towards his sort of plight. And of course, here, another thing I want to point out here is this particular line here. Sleep had come and gone in a mystifying kind of way, painting strange pictures in Lev's brain that had never completely vanished, right? This particular line, painting strange pictures in Lev's brain, right, talks about here, is the writer using a particular metaphor, and the reason why here is that sleep had come and gone in a mystifying kind of way, painting strange pictures. This is a metaphorical way of saying that during this difficult time when his wife was dying, right, Lev couldn't get much sleep, and as a result, his memory at this time is quite hazy. Okay, which is, and so painting strange pictures. So this time he had a lot of sort of hazy memory of this period, and it's understandable, right? Because during this time here, you know, during any sort of traumatic moments in one's life, right? You know, it wouldn't be surprising if someone became sort of shocked, right? Or you know, their memory sort of become hazy and fuzzy um, when, you know, when he's dealing with this very difficult issue of his wife dying, right? So this goes to show here that he's, you know, he's had to overcome some significant hardships. And moving on towards the evening, after 2 stops for gas, the mole-flecked woman, i.e. Lydia, unwrapped a hard-boiled egg. Now, one of the things I want you to keep in mind here, and we'll talk about it when we come back here, is notice the food. The food and the drinks that Lydia and Lev eat and consume. So here it talks about here she eats a hard-boiled egg. We'll come back to this. Now, she mentions here she eats this egg, and this egg is important because it reminds Lev, the smell of the hard-boiled egg reminds him of the sulfur springs at Jor. Now here we get to the second flashback, right? And this sulfur springs of Jor are important because in this case here, it tells us that he brought his deceased wife here, right? Just in case nature could cure what man had given up for loss. So here we see another example of sort of personification, right? Just in case nature could cure what man had given up for loss, speaks volumes about, again, his sort of love and consideration for his family, right? Because when the doctors told him, you know, that, you know, Marina cannot be saved, right? When man had given up for loss is sort of a euphemism for saying the doctors told, you know, said she had terminal illness, cannot be saved, right? Lev took her to these sulfur springs of Jor just in case nature could cure. So here we see that Lev was very loving of his wife and very desperate to save her, right? He was willing to take her to these sort of use whatever means possible, right? Even going to see if there's some nature cure, right, that could save his wife. So we could see that here he was willing to go to very extreme lengths, right, to save her. Marina had immersed her body obediently in the scummy water, right? The word scummy, the diction here, kind of gives us this sort of tactile kind of imagery of feeling, or even the scent, right? The olfactory smell of something quite disgusting, right? Which again kind of illustrates the extent that they're willing to try to save her, right? That they're willing to try any possible option. And while they were laying in this sort of really scummy, this disgusting water, right, she looks up and sees storks, right? Storks returning to his highness, and said, "If only we were storks." Now, what are storks? Storks are, if you take a look at this sort of picture here, right? Storks are important because storks traditionally are a symbol for life. Why? Because storks are the type of bird which carries babies, right? So storks carries this sort of symbolic meaning of life. Now, going back to our text here, right? She says, because if you see, you never see a stork dying, right? It's as though they didn't die. So here, the storks play an important role in this text as well, because the storks are a symbol for life. The fact that here the writer even italicizes this line, right, uses italics on this particular line, "if only we were storks," right, really goes to show, you know, the dreams, you know, the wishes of Lev, right? He wished that, you know, that he and his wife could have been these birds, right, to symbolically find life anew, right, to save her. Okay. Which of course helps us relate to the characters. On the woman's knee, a clean cotton napkin was spread, and her white hand smoothed it, and she unwrapped rye bread and twisted salt. So here we see her, right? She's now eating, you know, boiled eggs. She's eating rye bread and twisted salt. Okay. "My name is Lev," said Lev. "My name is Lydia," said the woman. So here they introduced each other, and they shook hands. Lev hand holding scrunch-up handkerchief, and Lydia's hand rough with salt. And now here we see the next part here. The text kind of moves on, right, and starts to get to the sort of the middle part of the text. And here, the two characters engage in a series of small talk. Okay, so they make casual conversation basically with each other, right? And so through the small talk, we learn some things about the characters, right? First of all, is she asked a question, or he asked a question, you know, "What are you planning to do in England?" Lydia says, I have some interviews in London for jobs as a translator. That sounds promising. Now, here we see that Lydia has some fairly good job prospects, right? So she's already got some interviews, right, lined up. So she's got a plan in place, right? She's, she may work as a translator, right? Which is a fairly technically proficient job because you need to know, obviously, 2 languages or more, to do this role. So she's quite got a fairly bright future ahead of her, right? And she talks a little bit about herself. She says, I was a teacher of English at school 237 in Yarble, so my language is very colloquial. So again, she's quite confident in her abilities. He looked at Lydia. It wasn't difficult to imagine her standing in front of a class, writing words on a blackboard. He said, I wonder why you're leaving our country when you had a good job at school 237 in Yarble. Now here we get to explore a little bit some of the differences in the characters, right? And so here, Lev asks this question, right? Wonder why you're leaving this country, leaving our country. We did a good job. Now for Lev, right? Do you remember? In this case here, why is Lev? Lev doesn't really understand. He thinks that you've got this good job. Why are you leaving? You've got a decent paying job. You've got money. You can take care of yourself. You can make a good living. Why are you leaving our country? Well, Lydia says, I became very tired of the view from my window. Every day, summer and winter, I looked out the schoolyard and the high fence and the apartment block. I began to imagine I would die seeing these things, and I didn't want this. I expect you understand what I mean. So here we see the first one of the differences between the two characters. And so here, Lydia's motivation for leaving, right? Her motivation for leaving is that she became tired of the view from my windows, meaning she was sort of bored, right? She was bored of looking out the window and sort of seeing the same monotonous view outside. So she was sort of bored with life. She wanted something new, perhaps, something, a change up, okay? Lev took off his leather cap and ran his fingers through his thick gray hair. He saw Lydia, turned to him for a moment, looked very serious in his eyes. He said, yes, I understand. Now, here, this is just my kind of interpretation, but when he says this, yes, I understand, I think it's, in this case here, he's just saying it just to pretend. I don't think he truly understands it. And he doesn't truly understand why, because here he says, then there was silence, because he doesn't necessarily agree, right? Perhaps, or he doesn't really understand, why would you leave such a good job, but he feigns it anyway just to pretend, he would understand. The fact that I mentioned here that there was silence kind of gives credence to that, to sort of my little belief here that, perhaps he didn't really understand it, but he pretends it, and then there's nothing more to say, which is, of course, leads to silence. So she eats her hard-boiled eggs, chews quietly, right? When she finishes her egg, Lev says, my English isn't too bad, took some classes, right? Baron, but my teacher told me my pronunciation wasn't very good. May I say some words? You can tell me I'm pronouncing them correctly. So here, the small talk continues, right? And they talk about practicing English. Now, in the next part here, there's a couple things we want to point out. I want to point out, but I'll point out when I get there. She says yes, right? Now, Lev says here. He says, lovely. Sorry, I am legal. How much, please? Thank you. May you help me? Now, right away, when you look at these words, right? What's a word that really stands out? Well, the key word for me here is definitely the word here, I am legal. Because in comparison, lovely, sorry, how much, please, thank you, and may you help me are fairly average day phrases that, of course, you might use in your everyday life. However, the word here, I am legal, speaks volumes about the sort of attitude that people have towards these migrants, right? These economic migrants. Remember the slide I mentioned earlier, right? What's the general world's perception of migrants? Well, in general, there's a lot of xenophobia against sort of people from other countries, right? So the fact that he knows this phrase goes to show that perhaps he's mentally prepared that people in other countries or in London may not be so receptive of his presence, right? They may not be so accepting of him being there in his country. Of course, here she corrects his mistakes, and then he goes on. Now, another two very important words here I need to mention here is notice that aside from this diction here, the language he memorized, he's also memorized and repeated the word stork and stork's nest, right? So now this word is very interesting. Why? Because again, if you look at the rest of it, rain, I'm lost, I wish from Trevor, B&B, again, very everyday, mundane, average everyday phrases that you would probably learn just so that you can kind of survive in your country, right? But the words stork and stork's nest, in contrast to the rest of these words, they're very specialized, right? Because think about it this way: how many times on an average day would you say stork or stork's nest, to your friends or family, right? You would probably almost never say it on, maybe, I don't know, once every couple of years, if that, right? But the point being is that stork and stork's nest is a very uncommon vocabulary. Yet you can see the fact that by the fact that Lev memorized and made a purpose to remember these words shows a lot about the significance of these two dictions. These two dictions carries a very powerful meaning to Lev. And we know why, because these are the words that his dying wife uttered, right? If only we were storks. So we can see just from the mere fact that Lev memorized this diction means that how much he cared about his wife, how much she meant to him. And so in this case here, how much he wants to hold on to that memory, so much so that he made an effort, a conscious effort, to learn and memorize these two words, okay? And next we get here, I wish for interpreter B and B. B and B, said Lydia, no, you mean to be or not to be. Now here we get the writer uses a little bit of humor, okay, to add a little bit of what I call kind of levity to the text, makes it a little bit more lighthearted, right? So not so heavy all the time. So in this case here, add a color. Adds a bit of levity to the text. So, of course, to be or not to be, everyone's familiar with, is a famous quote from, obviously, Shakespeare. And so there was a little bit of humor here, right? She assumes, because of the fact that she's an English teacher, right? She thought he memorized the line to be or not to be. But of course, no, said Lev, I'm not memorizing Shakespeare lines. When he's moving to a new country, rather, he's just trying to say the phrase B and B, which is bed and breakfast. Okay, family will tell, quite cheap. Oh yes, I know, bed, B and B. All right, and then we go on. Lev could see that darkness was falling outside the window, and he thought how in his village darkness had always arrived in precisely the same way, from the same direction, above the same trees, whether early or late, whether in summer or winter or spring, for the whole of his life. This darkness, particularly the place Auror, was how in Lev's heart darkness would always fall. Now, one of the things I want to point out here is that darkness in this text here carries a little bit of extra significance to Lev. Why? Because darkness in here is a reminder of his home. Okay? How do we know that? Because here it says that this darkness was how in Lev's heart darkness would always fall. So one of the things he's reminded of his home is because no matter where you are in this world, right, when night comes, when it's pitch black, it doesn't make much difference whether you're in city A or city B, I won't say city, but if you're in a rural town A or rural town B, right? Because no matter where you are in the world, darkness it's just pitch black, right? And so when darkness finally comes, he's again reminded of home, because he's thinking how the darkness of night here is similar to the darkness of home in Auror, right? So we can kind of assume from this, right, the fact that here he's constantly thinking of home tells us that, in a way, right, perhaps he's a little homesick already, right? He's missing home a lot, a significant deal. And so he told Lydia that he came from Auror, worked in the Baron sawmill until it closed 2 years ago, and then he found no work at all in his family. His mother, his 5-year-old daughter, and he had lived off the money his mother made from selling jewelry manufactured from tin. Now here we get to explore a little bit more about Lev's backstory. And here we find out that obviously his wife is deceased, and that he's only left with his 5-year-old daughter, right, and his mother, right. And here we develop a very strong sense of sympathy for our character Lev, right? Why? Because we find out here that he's got no job, right? He's got no money to take care of his family, and all the money they have are just small amounts of money they get from his mother, who sells jewelry manufactured from tin. Okay, so obviously tin is not a very precious material, right? So the money they make from here is not a lot. Okay, and also Lydia, I think that's very resourceful to make jewelry from tin. So she's trying to be nice, right? She tries to praise it. Of course, Lev said, but it's not enough. Okay, so he's quite blunt in the vocabulary he says, right? It's nice, but there's not enough money. And so this kind of tells us the reason why he's leaving all this place. He's leaving his home country, which he loves and misses so dearly, right? He's leaving because he needs to make more money to take care of his family. And then inside, you see here, it mentions here, tucked inside was a small flask of vodka. Now, vodka is a particular uh, alcohol. Okay, a flask of alcohol is like this. Okay, that's a flask. Vodka is the alcohol, right? So we see here, he's taking alcohol with him. Okay, he takes up the flask and takes a long swig, meaning drink. Lydia kept eating her rye bread. Now notice here sort of the contrast, right? So Lydia is someone who eats relatively healthy, right? She eats rye bread, she has boiled egg, but in contrast, Lev is someone who drinks vodka and smokes. Okay, those are the things he has with them, and so again, we see some of the contrast in the characters. He lives a very how should I say it, kind of almost like a rustic lifestyle. He lives a sort of, he smokes and drinks a lot, right? To remind himself either of his home, which is through the smoke, or in this case here, he's drinking to help him, perhaps to help him forget, okay? Or to kind of help pass time, or to kind of numb sort of the boredom, right? Lev wiped his mouth with a red handkerchief and saw his face reflected in the coach window. He looked away. Now, this here is a short sentence I do want us to take a look at here. When it mentions here he looked away, this here, why does he look away? Well, the death of his wife, Marina, he didn't like to catch sight of his own reflection, because that he always saw it was his own guilt at still being alive. Now, this guilt is what many people call here, what's called survivor's guilt, or other people call survivor syndrome. So whichever term you prefer is up to you. But the point being, the meaning is still the same, right? What does it mean, right? Basically, survivor's guilt or survivor syndrome means when someone, the surviving member, right, or surviving person, feels guilty at being alive. Not successfully saving their loved ones, or perhaps not dying together with their loved ones. So here we see that Lev experiences much the same important feeling. He feels survivor's guilt, right? He feels guilty of being alive. So he blames, in other words, he blames himself, right? Either for being still alive or not being able to save his wife. But either way, as a reader, right, we again feel sympathetic for him, because we know that no matter the circumstances, it's most likely not his fault, right? That he shouldn't feel guilty for his wife dying. It's most likely it wasn't his fault. So why did the sawmill at Barren close, Lydia? So here again, she asked some questions, right? You find out more about the backstory. They ran out of trees. Okay, so very practical reason. And then we get to the next big question. What other work can you do? Now here, notice that when she asks this question, what does Lev immediately do? Well, he takes a drink. So again, if he takes a drink, why? Because it's not an easy question for him to answer. Right? It's not an easy question for him to answer. Rather, it's quite difficult, right? And we see it in the line below. Someone had told him that, so here, it's not an easy answer to question answer, so he doesn't answer it right away. Rather, he thinks of something else. Right? He takes his mind off this topic. He takes a drink, and he thinks about how in England, alcohol or vodka is expensive. And here, we see a different aspect of him, right? Here, in this line here, immigrants made their own alcohol. When Lev thought about these industrious immigrants, he imagined them sitting by a coal fire in the tall house, talking and laughing with rain falling outside, red buses, which is a fairly iconic of the British transportation system, right? And a television flickering in the corner of the room. Notice here that his imagination, oddly enough, he's got a very creative or imaginative mind, right? And so in this case here, he sort of pictures in his own mind how would immigrants like himself, and how might they settle in this new country. And here he imagines a sort of simplistic lifestyle, right? They sit around by a fire, they laugh, they talk, right? There's a TV, and that's about it, right? So here he imagines that, people, the immigrants here, they live a sort of a simple lifestyle, which is maybe reflective of his own ambitions, right? He's not coming here with the mindset of an 18-year-old, looking to become the next Bill Gates. No, he's just looking to find a place to settle down, to be like any other immigrant, to make their own alcohol, right? To laugh, tell a few jokes, and to make a small living. He sighed and said, "I will do any work at all," which is kind of a little bit euphemism, right? It's kind of euphemistic. Basically means I don't have a job, right? I don't have an interview. He says, "I'll do anything," and he here explains the next line makes us feel a little bit sympathetic, right? You hear it in this next line is a listing. He says, "My daughter Maya needs clothes, shoes, books, toys, everything." So here, this listing tells us, the all the needs, the great financial pressure he has, right, to provide all of these things for his daughter. Right? He wants to give her all of these things. And to him, he says, "England is my hope." So here we see that he's got this sort of fairly optimistic outlook, right? He sees that England is his solution. It's going to save him from, and give us the means to take care of his family. Towards 10 o'clock, red blankets were given out, some of whom were already sleeping. Lydia put away the remnants of her meal, covered her body with a blanket, and switched on a fierce little light above her head. So here, basically, she, as the night falls and people fall asleep, she goes off and reads her own book. Fierce little light, I imagine, is a little bit like, the light you see on a plane. So if you've ever been on a plane and it's dark in the cabin, you turn on a little fierce little light. Well, that's kind of what she turns on. But that's not the focus here. The focus here, however, is what she's reading, right? She turns on this light and reads a faded old paperback printed in English with the title Power and the Glory. Now this one is an important book reference. And the reason why is because, is that Power and the Glory is, to give you a little bit of backstory, the Power and the Glory is a text that's about a Catholic priest who flees persecution from the country, which in this case here is Mexico, who's basically kind of banned Catholicism, right? He's banned the Catholic religion. So this priest is fleeing, or trying to kind of escape from this country where he's no longer accepted. Now, why is this important? Well, again, think about the character status, right? The characters are, again, they're migrants, right? They're migrants. They're going to another country to find work. But do remember how I mentioned how in many countries there's a very strong stigma against immigrants or migrants from other countries. There's a very strong feeling of xenophobia, right? There's a lot of feelings where there's anti-immigrants, anti-migrants, they're telling people don't come here. So in many ways, this reference to the book may be kind of alluding to some of the complications they may face in their future, but also it may indicate the reception these two characters may receive when they get to this new country, right? When they arrive in London, they may not be welcomed with open arms, right? So it kind of, in a way, it may foreshadow some of the treatment they may receive. But point being, it kind of highlights the negative stigma that a lot of the host countries, a lot of the local residents feel against people like Lev and Lydia. One thing I do want to point out, though, I forgot, so I apologize. To go a little bit back here, England is my hope. I know it's in this slide here. One other thing I want to point out here, England is my hope. Now, notice that here, I do want to point out that for Lev, the country of England is his sort of salvation, right? It's his solution. But also remember this line, because later on we'll make another reference. We'll come back to this line. Okay, England is my hope. We'll come back to this one, okay? His longing for a cigarette had grown steadily since he'd drunk the vodka, and now it was acute. So notice here that he mentions how, his desire for a cigarette is growing, right? He could feel the yearning in his lungs and in his blood, and his hands grew fidgety, right? So here, this line here is another example of listing, right? If you want to be specific, this could be synthetic, but it's another example of listing, right? He could feel the yearning in his lungs and in his blood and his hands, and grew fidgety, and he felt a tremor in his legs. So here, his body is almost convulsing, it's shaking, right? For its craving for nicotine. But at the same time, it could also be a reference or it could be a reflection of how not only is he missing nicotine, but also his body's also missing his country. Do remember that the cigarettes carries a symbolic meaning for his country, right? So in many ways, this line can also be an allusion to the fact that he not only needs cigarettes, but he's also missing his country. How long before the next gas stop? It could be 4 or 5 hours. Everyone on the bus would be asleep by then, except him and one of 2 drivers. Only they would keep a lonely, exhausting vigil. The driver's body tends to the moods and alarms of the dark, unraveling road. So here, the diction here, when it talks about here, the driver being aware of the dark, lonely road. Oops, sorry. Let me fix this here. The dark, unraveling road. So here, when it talks about here, the dark, unraveling road, this could also be the diction here. It creates a sort of mystery, feeling of mystery. It can be allusion to kind of how the future for these characters are a little bit unknown. Okay, that these characters, it could be a reflection of the fact that these characters don't know their own road ahead of them either. And then we see our character, his own, aching for the comfort of nicotine or oblivion. Now, oblivion is just another phrase for sleep. Okay, so here, basically, this line says that Lev wants either nicotine, which is from the smoke, or sleep, but he gets neither. So this line tells us that, again, his experience in this journey is not very comfortable. He envied Lydia, immersed in her English book. Lev knew he had to distract himself with something. In desperation, he took his wallet, a brand new British 20-pound note, reached up and switched on his little reading light and looked at the exact example of the note. What does the British 20-pound note look like? It looks a little bit like this, okay? On the one side, the Frumpy Queen Elizabeth II, so you can kind of see here, on the one side, E2R, right, is Queen Elizabeth. And on the other side, with her diadem, a diadem is the crown, okay? Her face gray on purple ground, and on the other, a man, some personage from the past. This is the backside. This is when it talks about here, a man. This is the man, okay? Some person with a dark drooping mustache, and all the angel's radiance falling on him in vertical lines. Here's the angel, and notice all the lines here, the radiance here falling on him. That's the radiance of the falling lines on him. And this man is actually a symbol, which we'll take a look at soon enough. Okay, we'll take a look at it a little bit below. Now, the next right then says the British venerate their history. Venerate means to revere or to regard with a great deal of respect. So, i.e., many Europeans look at the British and they think that the British basically thinks very highly of themselves, right? They think of themselves as having a very glorious past in history. Left in middle English class, chiefly because they had never been subjugated to occupation. What does that mean? Occupation meaning the country, the United Kingdom has never been colonized. Right? They've never been defeated and overrun, subject to be a colony of another country. Right? They've never been occupied. Right? Only intermittently do they see some of the past deeds were not good. So here we see that Lev's got a fairly negative, I guess, I would say, fairly negative impression of the British, right? He's not going there because he loves this country. Rather, when he looks at this country, right, he thinks that these people are very kind of a little bit arrogant, perhaps. They think very highly of themselves, right? They glorify their own history. So these are not, positive diction that we would use. He doesn't have a very positive impression of the country. He doesn't look up to these people, right? He thinks these people are, they think too highly of themselves. But notice here that he also capitalizes the word occupation, right? So here, the word, he highlights this word, right? And then he goes on. The indicated lifespan of the note was 1857 to 1934. Again, the man is here. This man here. He looked like a banker. Now, notice here the writer utilizes a simile. Now, he thinks that this man looks like a banker. Now, this is significant. Why? Because this man, his actual name is Edward Elgar. And if you actually Google him, right, Edward Elgar, he's not a banker. Rather, he is a very famous composer. And he's a composer who wrote a very patriotic song called, what was it called again? Sorry. He wrote this patriotic song. Let me check. Yes, he wrote a song called A Land of Hope and Glory. Okay, A Land of Hope and Glory. Now, this here is important. Why? Because A Land of Hope and Glory is a very nationalistic song. It's a very patriotic song, right? That sort of glorifies the achievements of the British. But the key thing here is that notice that for Lev, right, his initial assumption, which is incorrect, he thought that he was a banker. And this is important because in this case here, it goes to show how much of a emphasis that Lev places on the idea of money, right? He thinks money, it's obvious in this case here that money is very, very, very important to him. So much so that when he sees someone he doesn't know, right, he thinks it's someone important, therefore it's got to be a banker, right? He thinks, people, in this case, money, someone who's making money is very important. So, he makes this sort of incorrect assumption based on the fact that he's sort of influenced by his own need and desire for money. Lev stared at his determined jaw and squinted. His name was written on the skull beneath the wing collar and couldn't read it. He thought this person who could never known any other system of being alive but capitalism. Notice here again, he capitalizes the word here, capitalism. Now, the reason why he talks about here capitalism, though, is that what does he mean when he says that a person who had never known any other system of being alive but capitalism? Do remember that in this case, Lev, he's from an Eastern European country, so it most likely his influence, his government was most likely influenced by Soviet Russia, and so in this case here, most likely he himself lived a life under the communist government. Okay. And unfortunately, as we all know, Soviet Union collapsed, right, and their economy collapsed, and with it, a lot of the surrounding countries as well. So a lot of countries ended up under the communist government, ended up being really, really poor. So when he says here that this man wouldn't have known any other system but capitalism, he's basically saying, this man is very lucky because he lived under a capitalistic government. So, i.e., the chance to earn a lot of money. Whereas Lev himself, because of the fact he lived under a communist one, he wasn't afforded the same opportunity, and therefore he couldn't make that much money, right? He would have heard the names Stalin, Hitler, and Stalin, which we know from history are very two iconic, or actually not iconic, but more infamous characters in history, right? And had not been afraid, would have no need to be afraid of anything except a little loss in capital, i.e. meaning money, in economic terms, in what Americans called the crash. Notice that crash here is also capitalized. Now, when it talks about crash is a reference to a very famous historical event. Oops. In which case here, unfortunately, this text is a little hard to see, so let me change the comp. He's talking about the event crash, meaning the sort of the Great Depression, okay? Or the financial crashes. So he's talking about how the economy collapsing, okay? So notice again here, he's capitalizing crash here because this word here, this event is very important to him because again, it's related to money. Okay, when men in New York had jumped out of windows and off roofs. Okay? So again, he would have died safely in his bed before London was bombed to ruins, before Europe was torn apart. So when London was bombed, before Europe was torn apart, this is hyperbolic. It's a reference to saying, before World War II happened, and London and Europe was destroyed, right? Right to the end of his days, the angel's radiance had probably shone on this man's brow and on his fusty clothes, because it was known around the world the English were lucky. Notice here, the writer italicizes the word lucky, and this word is significant. Why? Because to Lev, right, this man is the embodiment of sort of luck. To Lev, the reason why he's sort of poor and he thinks of this embodiment of British wealth, right? This man is rich, is because of simply luck, right? Lev has, in this case here, is very confident in his own abilities. He feels he can make his own money. He can find his own way, right? He's got confidence in making money if only he was afforded the same opportunity. If only he was given the chance at capitalism, like this man. Okay, if only he was afforded the same luck, right, to be born under a capitalistic government, to have been born in the UK, he would have made the same amount of money. So for him, for Lev, right, this man is a symbol of the goal of what he's after. He's looking for the wealth. This is his target, someone he's chasing after. Okay. Well, thought Lev, I'm going to their country now, and I'm going to make them share it with me. Notice here the diction. I want us to point out here, I'm going to their country now. Now the pronoun there, right, makes it so that pretty evident that he feels that, in contrast here to my home, right, notice here, he's going to their country, so he feels he doesn't belong to this country. He knows he doesn't belong, right? His home is not London or the UK. His home is back with his daughter and his mother and his deceased wife. He knows he doesn't belong. But the thing is, he's going to their country now, and I'm going to make them share it with me. Notice the diction here he uses is very forceful. Is very determined. He's determined to make them share their wealth. He's very aggressive in this manner, right? Their infernal luck. The word infernal means irritable, right? Their irritating luck. Okay, so he feels sort of wrong, almost wronged in a way, right? That he didn't have this chance. He's going to make it happen. He's going to provide for his family. So we see this sort of determination in him. And finally, the text ends with, I've left Aurora, and that leaving of my home was hard and bitter. So here he admits that leaving his home was very difficult, but my time is coming. The text ends, again, with a very, very powerful statement, right? My time is coming. Basically, it means that here, he's going to make it work. The writer is going to successfully, make his mark, earn his money, and he's going to take care of his family. And in many ways, by the way that this text ends, right, as a reader, we can't help but feel, again, both sympathetic and in a way sort of inspired, right, that he's going to overcome all of these difficult challenges, and he has the strength and confidence and belief to make his dream, or not such a dream, but make his goal happen. So we feel it, as I feel it, ends on a very powerful note, right? That he's going to succeed, okay? And it leaves a very powerful impression on us as a reader. All right, now, before I wrap up, there's one last thing I do want to talk about, which is, if you recall a little bit here, it's about Edward Elgar. Notice that when I mentioned here that he is the composer of the song A Land of Hope and Glory, well, if you recall earlier on, he mentions the land as England is my hope. So notice that here, England is my hope is perhaps a little of a small allusion, to how perhaps this reference to this character, Edward Elgar, is not a mistake, right? Perhaps the writer is included Edward Elgar in here because to live, the UK or London is a land of hope and glory to him, right? This is the country where he hopes to, where he has hopes of providing for his daughter and a chance of glory, right? A chance of success that under a capitalistic government or economic system could afford him, and not this current one in the past. Okay. So that about wraps up at least our analysis of this text today. For your remaining task here is I'll post the details, but suffice to say, make sure you work on the worksheet I've created. You'll need to, again, fill in the blanks. I'll set the deadlines onto Schoology. Also note here, you'll also be given a homework question. Again, I'll be creating two submission folders for you to submit your assignments, A, to submit the textual analysis, and B, to submit your written essay on the reading question. Because this is a paper 2 text, your question will be based on, this one will be based on 30 marks, so make sure you plan accordingly, and good luck with your task. So hopefully you stuck it through and learned something from today's video. If you have any questions, feel free to ask, leave a comment, or what have you. Otherwise, good luck in your assignments, and get to work.